The host has started broadcasting a video on Facebook.
All right, guys, welcome to our Lunch and Learn for this Thursday. And we're very, very excited to bring you guys this one. My name is Jordan Moon, and I am the Public Relations and Events Coordinator for Saavi Services for the Blind. Today, we are going to talk about the blindness community and interacting with law enforcement. It's obviously, this is a topic that is permeating, our nation right now, dealing with, the interaction of law enforcement. And one community that hasn't barely been talked about is, law enforcement in the disabled community, and specifically in regard to this conversation, how law enforcement deal with the blind community. So my name is Jordan Moon, like I said. I'll be asking a couple questions to some of my colleagues. We have Roger Early here and Roxanne Torres, and we'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves right now.
So I'm Roxanne Torres, and I am the Community Relations and Family Services Coordinator for Saavi.
And I'm Roger Early, and I am the Facilities Manager and Wellness Coordinator for Saavi.
All right. And so for those of you who don't know, Roger used to be a police officer. He'll get into that a little bit. And Roxanne regularly takes part in trainings, diversity training. So we wanted to bring them together to talk about this very important issue. And I'll be asking some questions to kind of facilitate a discussion. So we'll get started right away with a question for Roger. Roger, just right off the bat, first of all, thanks for doing this. Sure. Right off the bat, what are some things right off the bat that you would say that law enforcement should know about when dealing with a blind citizen?
So I am a retired police officer. I have been retired for over 14 years, but I was a police officer for 20 years, and I worked at Pima Community College, and a lot of various roles in there, a lot of training roles at the police academy, and training police officers at Pima College, and a lot of other types of training. So I do have a kind of a background of what officers are taught at the police academy when it comes to these types of things. And I know that for sure that there's very little training that they do. They may have a 4-hour block on how to deal with EDPs, or emotionally disturbed people, and how to, to interact with them in a more of a controlling, peaceful, controlling way. But we don't go into other types of people with disabilities, and that is kind of an issue. And I did a lot of research and for this particular class, and I can definitely tell you that there definitely needs to be more training amongst law enforcement officers, especially with the blind community. So what I think though is that as the law enforcement officers, they need to understand what the person who is blind feeling at that time of the situation. There's a lot of different things that might be going in their minds because they don't get all the information that they need to kind of fully analyze the situation that they're in. And so law enforcement officers, I think, need to do a better job of communicating those types of things to people who are blind in those types of situations.
Oh, awesome. By the way, guys, feel free to comment with questions or anything that you want to add to the discussion. We have Scott Tokanaka, our fantastic producer, helping us out with this. So if there's questions that you have, feel free to put them in the chat. Roxanne, my question for you is, Roger was saying that there's not a lot of training that goes into it. So from your perspective, what are some common misperceptions of blindness that someone in law enforcement should know?
Well, I think there's so many common misperceptions, misnomers, so to speak, not just limited to law enforcement, just the community in general. Mm-hmm. But law enforcement, I guess, that is the topic we're talking about. I believe that some of the misconceptions they may have are maybe just pretty plainly putting it as just communication. Just like anybody else, like I said, in the community, people just really have to recognize that because an individual is blind doesn't make that he or she is not capable of making a decision or recognizing instruction or following direction. But the key point to that is those directions and that communication being pretty detailed. I believe that in dealing, I have had my own dealings with law enforcement here in my home. I wasn't arrested, so I don't want that out there on social media. I have a clean record, but I have had a situation where I've had law enforcement show up here at home because I've heard some noises, an individual actually in my backyard. And so some of those misconceptions are, let me take care of you. And although that's what we're wanting from our law enforcement, we have to make sure that they recognize what part of that taking care of me is what needs to be fulfilled. Not so much a taking care of me as, well, ma'am, you really don't know what you heard, or, well, ma'am, yeah, there may have been a helicopter over here, but it had nothing to do with your area. And I'm visiting that situation that I had personally. I would just say, in a very short answer, is just recognize that just because we are blind does not mean we are not capable of evaluating or determining a situation that might not be safe for us. And it's really a very detailed situation where I think just further discussion would be best for all of us.
Great answer. Roger, from a officer's perspective, when you see somebody who's disabled or blind, that you have to interact with, what are some of the things that may go through a police officer's mind when dealing with a person who has a disability?
So a lot of times it all depends on the situation, the circumstances that are happening at that time. If the officer, oh gosh, I'm losing my train of thought already here. Can you give me the question again?
So, when you're interacting with, when an officer sees someone who, has a disability, or in this case, who's blind, like what are some of the things that you would say run through the officer's mind as far as, ways in which they can communicate, or, what are some of the first thoughts that officers think about when dealing with, someone who's blind?
Okay. So yes, I've had that experience myself as an officer. And to be honest with you, I'm not happy with the way I kind of thought about it. But when you first approach a scene and you have a person who, in my case, it was a person who was deaf. And I knew, oh gosh, this is going to take a long time because I'm going to have to write everything out, and it's just going to take a long time. It had nothing to do with any other aspect of it other than just this, my patience of having to deal with this at this time. I thought of that. You don't show the actions when you're doing that, but you think about those kind of things when you do approach those kind of scenes. That's obviously not the right way to think about those things, but I know in an officer's mind when they're busy and they're going from call to call, sometimes these things kind of pop up that way, and you just have to be aware of those situations and just give yourself a little bit more time and understanding, because they are going through the same things with the same situations. Like, oh my gosh, got to deal with a police officer. I'm going to have to write everything out. It's just about communication, like we always go back to.
Yeah, and so speaking of communication, Roxanne, when, let's say an officer does encounter someone who's blind, in your view, officers, we're such a visual society. We rely on pointing, stand over there or walk this way or whatever. Yeah. In your view, what are some basic tips that you could say as far as, a way to communicate to a blind person what you might want them to do, what an officer might want them to do?
Well, in general, again, just revisiting that first answer, it's just communication in detail. So obviously, if I'm being approached by some type of law enforcement and they're wanting me to maybe get out of the way or just go to a particular designated area that I have to be in, obviously the pointing, ma'am, go this way, or ma'am, go that way. that's not going to work for me, because I'm totally blind and I'm not going to know where this pointing finger is or that pointing finger is. So just being pretty detailed and using that communication that's a little more specific and detailed. Ma'am, can I have you take 4 steps back? Or ma'am, can I have you move, maybe 6 feet to your right? Whatever it may be. And it's not, it's just it's a common thing. It's not something that's going to be automatic. It's something that's a practice. But I think the more that an individual, law enforcement, since we're speaking of that again, kind of recognizes and sees that that individual is blind with his identifiers, it may be a cane or a dog guide, just automatically get that thought in your head, I'm really going to have to be detailed, just as you do when you see a deaf individual, like Roger just mentioned, as he's, approaching this individual who he recognizes as being deaf, is automatically recognizing, I'm going to have to be writing things down for this person. So it's, like I said, it's practice, but it's not something that's impossible to apply.
Awesome. Scott, do we have any comments so far on the page, or anybody asking questions?
No, you're doing good. You've got about 5 people viewing and everybody says hi. So
Hello, hi.
Thanks for watching. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Again, feel free to comment. Even if it's not a question, just maybe your experience. If you are blind and you've interacted with, a police officer and you had a good experience, or any advice, feel free to comment and interact with us. Roger.
Yeah, actually, Jordan, can I comment on?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so in the officer's perspective, when he's giving directions, that officer, yes, should understand that they need to give more of a descriptive directions and things like that. I wrote down some things about, I know if you're at an intersection and the cars are going by, the officer is going to have to yell really loud, and it could be like, "Hey, get up on the curb." And, he's trying to, it may sound like he's mad or something like that, but it could be that he just, because of busy traffic going by, he has to talk a lot louder, and he didn't say it the right way. So it can start agitating the person. And that's, again, that ineffective communication starts to happen right there again. So as an officer, this officer just has to understand, to get better communications, just understand what the other person is going through.
And I'm really glad if I could just
Go ahead.
talk on that a little bit more. That's really good, Roger. I think that's excellent to mention. So that just made me think a little bit more. So if I'm on the street and it's not just myself, but it's a few other people on there, and I hear somebody say, "Hey, get up on the curb," it's pretty good to identify the individual you're speaking to. For example, I may be in a situation where somebody's saying something and it may not even be directed to me. I have a habit of, when somebody addresses myself or someone next to me, I always put my hand on my chest, like, "Me? You're talking to me?" So maybe if not all blind people, of course, are going to do that. That's just a habit I have. But maybe we could talk a little bit more as to how that officer can address the blind individual directly. Maybe the individual may think there's other people around him and there really isn't. So how will that individual know that the officer is addressing him? Maybe, "Excuse me, ma'am, you with the white cane, can you get on that curb?" Or excuse me, young man, you with the dog guide, do you mind moving back 4 steps? What do you guys think about that?
I totally agree. I think that's what the officer should do. And it just takes a split second more to think about it before you react. And that's really all it takes. It's just that awareness, split second to think about it, and then react.
Mm-hmm.
Roger, what would be, and I guess Roxanne, you can chime in on this too. What would be like an ideal situation, like an ideal interaction with someone who's blind? Like if you had to walk a police officer from maybe start to finish, when approaching and handling someone a citizen who's blind, what would you say that looks like?
Okay. Do you want to just a kind of scenario, and we can kind of role play it, or?
Yeah, or just like, kind of an overview. I mean, it doesn't have to be like a specific situation, but maybe just like would that involve great communication? I know you guys kind of hit on it a lot, but more of like, well, what are you kind of imagining that a perfect, scenario going like?
Okay. All right. So here's my scenario I was thinking about, and this has actually happened. Research I've been following. A person that has their service dog with them trying to get into an Uber. Uber Uber driver starts getting mad. It escalates. Police are called. Cops show up, and now the person who's blind standing on the corner while the officer is on the talking to the other person there. In that particular situation, that the person who's blind is standing on the corner and has no idea what's going on in their surroundings. What is that officer talking to that driver? Are they talking in nice tones? Is he sounding more in favor of the officer or in favor of the driver instead of me? A lot of different things are going on in that person's mind at that time. So as an officer, what they should do is walk up and recognize the person that they're there and say, okay, most likely I understand there's a possible victim and a complainant or a driver or a suspect or something. They should be going to, depending on the circumstances, they should go to the suspect first if they need to control that person before they can go talk to anyone else. In this particular case, what they could have done was they could walk over to the person who's blind and say, hey, I'm Officer Jones. Do you need to get any more recognition from me? If you need to touch my badge, you can. And I would only recommend an officer doing that if he was a victim or a witness and not a suspect. But you touch the badge, you can have the person get on the dispatch, have the dispatcher get on the phone or the radio and say, yes, this is Officer Joe talking to. There's ways for that person to recognize that they're talking to a police officer. They can give that police officer information knowing it's going to be more safe than to whoever that they don't no idea who they're giving it to. So once they know that, they actually can give some control to that police officer to help the situation. So talking to that person, hey, I'm Officer Jones. Once you get that recognition of the officer, okay, this is what's going on here. I'm going to be talking to the driver over there, for a little bit. Then I'm going to come right back and talk to you. Is that okay? And then they go talk to that person, so that other person's just standing there understanding what's going on. That officer should go back and forth giving updates and say, I've done talking to that person, so I'm gonna let them go and I'm talking to you now and all this kind of stuff. But just keeping that other person up to date so that they can recognize and keep aware of all their surroundings and have all that information that they need to make those decisions properly, I guess.
I really I'm sorry, Jordan, but I was just gonna say, Roger, I really like the whole the radio cue. That's pretty cool because in getting prepped for this presentation here, I kind of thought about that. Like, how would a blind individual know that it's actually a law enforcement officer approaching them on the street? Anybody can come up and say, hey, can I talk to you? I'm with the Tucson Police Department or whatever police department it may be. How do you know that's exactly who it is? Because ideal is great, but ideal isn't real, right? It doesn't always happen that way. So how do you know? And touching a badge, do I really know it's a badge that I'm touching? Somebody's really aiming to hurt an individual. How do you know? So I really like that whole radio thing. I know in home, when you're in your home or maybe in another place where you or somebody else may have called an officer for whatever safety purposes. I know you can always make sure that the dispatcher, you call 911, of course, you're speaking with the dispatcher and they can cue you as to when that officer is actually approaching the place where you are situated. But I really like that whole radio. I really had never thought about that. That's really, really good to apply.
Yeah, and I love the example that you used, by the way, Roger, because we in the blindness community have seen a lot of issues with Uber and service animals, and that's a pretty common situation. So that's a great example that you used. Roxanne, a question for you. Just to kind of educate police officers, other law enforcement that might be watching this, what are you got blind people who may just be losing their sight, blind people who've been blind their whole life, different levels of visual acuity. What are the various levels of independence that blind people have, and what are some of the tools that they use to be independent?
Wow, that's a really good question. Levels of independence, that just really varies. it's more than just your level of independence, it's your level of acceptance and you applying whatever training maybe you have received. And so that's really gonna vary individual by individual. Of course, someone maybe that's very new to blindness might not be as independent as someone who maybe is new to blindness, but has really applied their training. So you might see somebody in the company of another individual. You might see that individual, the sighted individual, giving the blind individual some cues, some verbal cues, or you might see somebody who's perfectly independent, walking down the street, doing what they got to do, just like everybody else, approaching a building, finding the door, going inside, and doing their business just like everybody else. And there's so many tools out there. I will mention some. Obviously, we have our long white canes. Some are long and solid white. Some are a little shorter. Some have a red tip to them. They vary. But if you see an individual with a cane, a white cane, and you see them using that cane to kind of clear the area that's in front of them, swiping left to right, or maybe tapping left to right, you're going to know that that individual is blind. I'm gonna phrase it this way: how blind that individual is, I don't really think that. My personal opinion is that really isn't pertinent. Blind is blind. If you've got a little bit of vision, if you got a little bit more vision, there's going to be a degree of blindness. So that person is blind. Dog guides. You may see an individual using a tool as a dog guide. You'll see that individual walking down the streets and doing everything else. Sometimes they might have a cane and a dog guide. And other tools that really help are, there's so many technologies, but technologies, emails. I'm thinking of ways that maybe law enforcement can communicate electronically. Maybe there's something that needs to be served on an individual. It would be great if we could get everything electronically, but then again, the blind community would have to identify themselves as being such, put in some type of request. I don't know all those steps, but we do have a lot of electronic technologies, and of course, Braille. Now, Braille, I kind of thought about this a little bit because, the four of us, Scott too, we all work at Saavi, and we have these cool business cards that have Braille on them. How cool would it be for our law enforcement to maybe carry a couple of business cards that have some Braille, and when they approach an individual who's blind, whether it's a situation they're experiencing at their home or out in the community, to maybe hand out a business card with some Braille. What do you guys think about that? Because I would think that would be really cool.
Yeah, I think that would be a great community policing tool. And we need a lot more of that nowadays. And so, yeah, I think that would be good. Have nice little phrases on them or whatever they need to have on them.
Yeah, just like maybe they're, usually what do they have, Roger? Like your contact and maybe your badge number or whatever pertinent information. I think that would be very inclusive and really, really
And it
cool.
might help with the idea that you were saying earlier, Roxanne, about, how does a blind person know whether or not it's a police or not? So that's a good suggestion.
Exactly.
And kind of to follow up with that question, this is my last question for you, Roger, is you have the perspective now of working with, our community, by being at Saavi, and you were a law enforcement police officer. So from your perspective, what are, the things that you feel like both sides should understand about each other, like on a basic level? What would you say?
Well, again, it comes down to communications. As long as both sides are communicating properly, it may be that the person who's blind needs to kind of educate the police officer at some points during their interactions that way. But I don't know really. It's kind of tough. I don't know. Can I think about this for a second while Roxanne talks?
Yeah, definitely. I know it's not, these are definitely not easy questions, and that's why we have to have this conversation for sure.
Can I add something? Sorry, Roxanne.
No, go.
I think what's important too is I love this discussion of what we're doing. I love the perspective from the police officer. I think it's really important what Roxanne is saying and what Roger and Jordan is saying. But I think as a blind individual myself, I think we also have to make sure that the blind individual needs to take the responsibility themselves to explain that to a police officer, because everybody, like you said, Roxanne, comes at different levels of blindness.
Right.
And not everybody is going to walk with a cane. Not everybody's going to be able to be comfortable to say it. But unfortunately, in this situation, you really have to be vocal about it.
Absolutely.
Because the police officer does not know, is not educated as much as maybe yourself. So having the ability to just say, hey, sir, I'm blind. Can you please explain to me where I need to go? I think goes a long way in communication. So
Absolutely.
I love what you said about communication. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Sorry.
Oh, that's
No,
really
no,
good.
thank you.
That's really
For
good.
sure.
And Jordan, can I get a retake on one of the questions on the Miss?
Yeah, go ahead.
This I'm going to put out there because I know we've all experienced this. All of us work with Saavi, right? So one of the biggest things that we experienced, in fact, not too long ago, is a lot of local businesses were reporting individuals walking down the street with a cane and a sleep shade. Many people thought that they were doing some type of a prank. Well, FYI, it's not a prank. We've got our students going out there and practicing non-visual skills. This kind of got pretty hairy and up to the level to where we actually had law enforcement coming and visiting our office. So please, what I ask is, take our word for it. We really don't have, if you know that there's a blind training center nearby in a close proximity, and maybe it might not even be, we might have a student practicing out in their own neighborhood. But if you see an individual with the cane, you see them with the sleep shade, they're practicing crossing the street, they might be walking down a sidewalk, they are learning. And all of us, whether you're sighted, whether you're blind, all of us learn different things, right? And so these students are learning how to gain that independence, how to acquire their travel skills. If it comes to the level where somebody might report it and you need to follow up with the agency, great, so be it, but please take our word for what it is. You may think that that individual might be in some type of danger. That's a very common perspective to have, but know that those individuals have an instructor that is nearby, especially our new students that are just learning how to do mobility. We're not going to send anybody out just, here you go, here's a cane, here's a sleep shade, knock yourself out. Absolutely not. These students are going to get direction. In fact, Scott's one of our mobility instructors, and he can probably speak more to this than I, but that's one of the things that I really want to put out there is, please don't assume. Asking is the best thing. And again, that goes to communication.
Yeah, that's a great call, Roxanne. Just to add my perspective really quickly on that, I tell a lot of people all the time, if it looks like I'm lost, that might not necessarily be the case. In order for someone who's blind to cross the street, for example, they really need to make sure that they're analyzing the traffic correctly, and they might be standing on a corner for a couple of cycles. And so a police officer might look at that and say, like, oh, that person really needs help, or, I should help them out. And so the number one thing that they do is, they assume, like Roxanne was saying, instead of saying like, sir, or ma'am, like, can I help you, or that type of thing, they just go, hey, let me help you get across, and so I think it is best to just assume, because a lot of times blind people, we're processing things. That's our mode of travel. We don't have the luxury of just looking up and seeing that a light is green, or looking up and seeing a certain path to take or whatever. We use our cane, we use our other abilities to explore. So it's a very good point.
All right, we have a question here.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
All right, it says, do you think officers are more lenient with blind people than others they may interact with, or do they treat them with the same even when the blind person is doing something wrong? Let me read that again. Do you think officers are more lenient with blind people than others they may interact with, or don't treat them the same way when the blind person is doing something wrong?
Great
question.
Roger?
Okay, so as 20 years, I'd never had to deal with that kind of a situation where I had a person who was blind that was a suspect. So it's hard to say how that would work out. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I've never experienced that, and I don't know how to compare. I think maybe that might be presumptuous to think that they might be a little more lenient, and maybe the question is stemming from the general community, really wanting to be helpful. I would hope that, I mean, come on, blind people just because we're blind doesn't mean we're all angels, right? So there are going to be some bad actions taken by some individuals in the blind community, and I would expect that, justice would be served on them just as much as anybody else.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Roger? Yeah.
I agree in that sense that the officers, they would almost ticket their mother if the mother was driving fast, just because that's what they're told to do. It's, they have some discretion, but, they got a job to do. And if the person did something wrong, they should be getting what they should be getting. There's no leniency towards any particular group that way.
Yeah.
As
so it should be. Mm-hmm.
Okay, last two questions here, and these are for both of you guys. How would a law enforcement officer, and I guess Roxanne, you kind of start with this, what would be ideal, assist someone who's blind in an evacuation or some type of emergency situation where, quick intervention is necessary? Would they provide transportation? Would they do human guide? What would you suggest, Roxanne?
Well, I have obviously I thought about that question quite a bit. I do wonder about that. I mean, so as far as assisting, say there's some type of an evacuation situation, you're in your neighborhood, something's going on, 2 houses down there, evacuating the neighborhood, come and knock on your door. We need you to leave. We need you to get out right away. I would hope that the law enforcement individual would first give me time to do what I got to do, get my shoes on, get my cane, and get out. Maybe there are obstacles in my yard. Maybe there's things that I'm not used to having. Of course, I'm going to have my cane. I need to use my cane. But if I got to get out of there quickly, I would really hope that individual would either, one, provide some type of a sighted guide, or just let me know, you're going to want to go down on your driveway rather than your sidewalk. We've got some obstacles there, whatever it may be. I'm just kind of thinking out loud right now, and just kind of provide me a clear path to safety. And I do wonder about that transportation. If I'm by myself, I don't have anybody here to drive me somewhere, and I got to take off. I got to leave. I don't know, maybe I'm not comfortable asking my neighbors. Maybe I gotta, I don't know, walk down the street and get an Uber. I don't know, but Roger, what would transportation like that, what would it look like in some type of an emergency situation like that, as far as transportation? Because of course that's a barrier we face.
Right. So if there's an emergency situation going on, there's going to be many officers or other EMS personnel around there, hopefully. So when the officer determines that the person that's in that house is blind and needs to get out, that officer is going to have to say, okay, how do you want me to take you out here? Do you want to, side guide you? You want to lend you my elbow, my shoulder? And then they're going to guide them out to the safest place, which would either be in their vehicle so they can drive out, or give that person to another person to say, okay, miss, I'm taking you, I'm giving you to this person here. They're going to take you off to the other side of the parking lot, whatever. But if there's a situation going on, that officer is not going to have too much time to spend time with that person. They're going to have to deal with that threat. So they're going to have to maybe pass that person off depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So final question I have for both of you, we still have the one of the questions we started off with to Roxanne was, what are the common misperceptions? And, I was asking Roger, what is something that you want officers to know about blind people? There's still a long way to go in this conversation. We're just scratching the surface, but it's great that we're having it. Blind, there's a lot of misperceptions about blindness. Roxanne touched on, at Saavi Services for the Blind, we wear these things called learning shades. And, if you don't know about learning shades, they're blindfolds, and it's part of our training. We teach non-visual training skills here. And so, officers don't encounter that, or other methods of traveling or interacting, or other tools and things that blind people use, officers may not know. Um, from both of your guys' perspective, what are the solutions, the educational things we could do to educate the law enforcement community better on understanding blind people in the complex world that is blindness?
Roger, you want to take that?
Actually, I'm sorry. Someone, I don't know if you heard that noise in the hallway here, but it was pretty loud. I didn't hear the question.
We're just talking about like some of the solutions to like the kind of the gap, bridging the gap of that understanding, how to better understand the blindness community. What are some of the educational things that we could do to kind of make both communities comfortable with each other?
Well, so I think the officers need to understand that a blind person may not be receiving all the communication signals that they can get from their surroundings. So sometimes that will make them feel unsafe or unsure of the dynamics of the situation. It puts them at ease. And it's better to keep that person at ease. So the officers should be communicating more effectively, setting up the initial approach, telling them, okay, I'm going to be coming back and talking to you at different points, letting the person know that they're being taken care of that way. As for the education part of it all, I mean, what I would like to do with this, I'm gathering all this information. I've been writing notes down as we go here too. I like to present this information to police officers at their, they have, 15-minute briefings at their daily briefings that they have, or they have training sessions, in-service training sessions. Roxanne and I can go over there and do a presentation to them. And so that it'll eventually get disseminated to all the police officers, and even doing it at the training academy where all the officers in the state of Arizona get, so they get the same information. I think that would be beneficial as well.
I agree. It's always training, just like this little forum that we're having here. That's how we learn. It's always training. And so that's the best idea, Roger, is getting out there and talking again, communication, getting out there. I think the academy is a great idea. You get all the different agencies there in one. You get these gentlemen and ladies that are there, pursuing a career in law enforcement fresh. And you talk to them and you speak, not to them, you speak with them. And having both Roger going as a former law enforcement individual and myself as a blind individual, I think that would be very impactful in just getting out there and putting the word out. And so with that in mind, if there is anybody out there from any law enforcement agency or anybody watching who has a connection or a relative to anybody in some type of law enforcement agency, call us, reach out to us, start getting those trainings, be inclusive. That's ideal. That right there is ideal, is being inclusive and being a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
Awesome. Great comments. Scott, do we have any final questions or anybody who commented?
Dale Ramsey, he's actually one of our students.
Mm-hmm.
He says, LEOs or Leos have a very difficult job. They have considered all types of people and situations. Help them help you. Try to understand their position for your safety, for those around you and Leos. Follow instructions and do what you need to do. Feel safe. It's everyone's responsibility. So I really thought Dale had brought it really good.
That's really good, Dale.
It's a nice perspective.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, is there anything, Roxanne and Roger, that you guys want to say before we wrap this up? Anything you want to add?
Oh, I'm just really glad we had this conversation. Thanks for thinking of this, Jordan or Scott. I'm not sure which one of you had the idea, but it was a great idea. And thank you, Roger. It's always great to co-host things with you, Roger.
Right. Well, thank you, Roxanne. And I enjoyed this. I learned a lot while doing the research and just by talking in this lunch and learn. So thank you all for participating too.
Please reach out to us, guys, if you have any questions. We'll put some of that contact info in the comments and just, thank you guys, Roxanne and Roger and Scott for doing this. Every Tuesday and Thursday at noon, come here for our lunch and learns. Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.